In the dark heart of 1943, the Allied strategic bombing campaign against Nazi Germany was on the brink of collapse. Day after day, formations of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators lumbered into the hostile skies over the Third Reich, their mission vital, to cripple Germany's war machine from the air, but they were dying. The cost was staggering, almost unsustainably so. On missions deep into Germany, like the infamous Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, bomber crews were facing loss rates of 20 to 25%. Think about that. For every 4 planes that went out, one wasn't coming back. The young men inside, entombed in aluminum and plexiglass, were fighting a desperate, one-sided battle against the hardened veterans of the German Luftwaffe. The problem was simple, yet seemingly insurmountable: range. The primary American fighters of the time, the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning, were excellent aircraft. They were tough, well-armed, and could hold their own against the formidable Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s. But they were thirsty. Their combat radius was limited. They could escort the bombers part of the way, but as the formations pushed deeper towards targets like Berlin or Leipzig, the little friends, as the bomber crews called them, would have to waggle their wings in farewell and turn for home, their fuel gauges running low. It was at this moment, the moment the escorts departed, that the German wolves would pounce. The sky would fill with cannon shells and rockets. The bombers, stripped of their protection, were left to fend for themselves in a maelstrom of enemy fire. Morale was plummeting. The entire strategy, the very idea of winning the war through air power, was in jeopardy. A solution had to be found, or the daylight bombing offensive would have to be abandoned. The answer to this life or death question didn't come from a grand American military design competition. It came, ironically, from a British request in a small, ambitious aircraft company that had never built a fighter before. In 1940, with the Battle of Britain raging, the British Air Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation, or NWA, asking them to build P-40 Warhawks under license. The head of NWA, James Dutch Kindleberger, made a bold counteroffer: "Let us design and build a brand new, better fighter for you, and we'll have a prototype ready in 120 days. It was an audacious promise, but NWA delivered. The result was the NA-73X, the prototype for what the British would christen the Mustang. This early Mustang was a revolutionary aircraft in many ways. It featured a groundbreaking laminar flow wing, an airfoil designed to dramatically reduce drag, allowing for higher speeds and greater fuel efficiency. It was sleek, fast, and handled beautifully, but it had a fatal flaw: a heart that wasn't up to the task. It was powered by an Allison V1710 engine. While a solid and reliable engine, the Allison's performance dropped off sharply above 15,000 feet. It was a low-altitude engine in a high-altitude war. The early Mustangs were excellent at ground attack and tactical reconnaissance, but in the high-altitude dogfights where the fate of the bomber streams was being decided, they were out of their element, easily outperformed by their German adversaries. The aircraft was a brilliant design, let down by its power plant. It was a thoroughbred horse with the lungs of a Shetland pony. The Mustang could have faded into history as a respectable but ultimately niche aircraft. But then came the single greatest modification of the Second World War, a transatlantic heart transplant that would create a legend. A Rolls-Royce test pilot named Ronnie Harker, after flying an Allison-powered Mustang, remarked that the brilliant airframe would be a world beater if it were fitted with their own high-performance engine, the Merlin. The same legendary engine that powered the Spitfire and Hurricane. The key to the Merlin's magic was its 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger. Think of a supercharger as a pump that forces more air into the engine, allowing it to burn more fuel and produce more power. In the thin atmosphere of high altitude, this is critical. The Merlin's sophisticated 2-stage system was like giving the engine an advanced set of mechanical lungs, allowing it to breathe and maintain its immense power output at altitudes over 30,000 feet, right where the bombers flew and the Luftwaffe lay in wait. The Americans, recognizing the potential, began a crash program. The American company Packard was already building Merlins under license, designated the V1650. Engineers at NAA worked feverishly, modifying the Mustang's airframe to accept this new, more powerful, and more complex engine. The result was the P-51B Mustang, and it was a revelation. The difference was night and day. The new Mustang could climb like a rocket and was now faster than any German piston engine fighter at high altitude. The thoroughbred finally had the heart it deserved. The legend was born, but perfection was yet to come. That arrived with the P-51D, the definitive and most iconic version of the Mustang. The D model incorporated the powerful Packard VU1657 Merlin engine, capable of kicking out over 1,600 horsepower on war emergency power. This gave it a top speed of nearly 440 miles per hour. But speed was only part of the equation. The designers at NWA had masterfully engineered the aircraft to carry an enormous amount of fuel. With its internal tanks and 2 external drop tanks, the P-51D had a combat radius that was simply staggering. It could fly from bases in England to Berlin, fight for 30 minutes over the target, and fly all the way back. The range problem was solved. The P-51D P-51D was also a killer. Its armament was standardized to 6 wing-mounted 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, a weapon with excellent range, accuracy, and hitting power. A short burst from these 6 guns could tear a Focke-Wulf or Messerschmitt to shreds. Perhaps the most significant improvement for the pilot was the new canopy. The earlier models had a birdcage-style canopy with a raised spine behind the pilot, creating a dangerous blind spot to the rear. The P-51D introduced a frameless teardrop bubble canopy, giving the pilot an unobstructed 360-degree view of the sky. In the swirling chaos of a dogfight, the ability to see an enemy before he sees you is the difference between life and death. The P-51D gave its pilots that critical edge. It was the complete package, a long-range, high-altitude, fast, maneuverable, and heavily armed fighting machine with unparalleled visibility. It was a pilot's dream and a German pilot's nightmare. When these Merlin-powered Mustangs began arriving in Europe in late 1943 and early 1944, the tide of the air war turned, and it turned with shocking speed. Initially, they flew in their intended role, close escort, sticking to the bomber formations like glue. Bomber losses began to drop, but the commander of the U.S. 8th Air Force, General Jimmy Doolittle, the same man who had led the famous raid on Tokyo, made a fateful and brilliant decision. In early 1944, he issued a new directive. He released the fighters. They were no longer leashed to the bombers. His order was simple: go out and hunt. The Mustang pilots were unleashed. After escorting the bombers to their targets, they were free to roam across Germany, seeking out and destroying the Luftwaffe wherever they could find it. The hunters became the hunted. P-51s would sweep ahead of the bomber streams, pouncing on German fighters as they assembled. They would strafe German airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground, blowing up fuel dumps, and shooting up hangars. For the Luftwaffe, there was no safe haven. Their pilots, once the confident masters of their own skies, were now stalked relentlessly from the moment they took off. The effect was catastrophic for the German Air Force. During a period in February 1944 known as Big Week, the 8th Air Force, with its new Mustang escorts, launched a sustained assault on German aircraft factories. In 6 days of brutal fighting, the Luftwaffe lost over 600 fighters and, more importantly, hundreds of experienced pilots they could not replace. The back of the Luftwaffe was broken. The P-51 Mustang had established total air supremacy over the heart of the Third Reich. This victory in the skies had profound consequences on the ground. With the Luftwaffe shattered, the strategic bombing campaign could proceed with devastating effectiveness. Allied bombers, protected by their little friends, systematically dismantled Germany's war industry. They leveled factories, pulverized railway yards, and, crucially, destroyed the synthetic oil plants that produced Germany's fuel. The German war machine was slowly being starved to death. By the time of the D-Day landings in June 1944, the skies over Normandy were almost completely clear of German aircraft. The Mustang had ensured that the Allied invasion force would not be threatened from the air, a factor absolutely critical to the success of the landings. 1. Pilots adored the Mustang. They called it the Cadillac of the skies. It was responsive, forgiving, and incredibly powerful. It could outturn, outclimb, and outrun nearly anything it faced. For the young American pilots, many of them fresh from farms and cities back home, the P-51 was their steed, their weapon, and their lifeline. It gave them the confidence to take on the battle-hardened aces of the Luftwaffe and win. While its fame was cemented in the skies over Europe, the Mustang story didn't end there. In the Pacific theater, the introduction of the long-range P-51, flying from newly captured bases like Iwo Jima, allowed fighters to escort B-29 superfortresses on their grueling 1,500-mile raids to mainland Japan, drastically reducing the horrific losses the B-29s had been suffering. After World War II, the Mustang, redesignated the F-51, went on to serve with distinction in the Korean War, proving its worth once again as a rugged and effective ground attack aircraft. But in the strategic calculus of the air war over Europe, the P-51 was the tipping point. It was the key that unlocked the full, devastating potential of Allied air power. It was the weapon that directly addressed the most critical vulnerability the Allies faced in 1943. It saved the daylight bombing campaign, it destroyed the Luftwaffe, and it cleared the skies for D-Day. Without the P-51, the war in Europe would have undoubtedly lasted longer and been far costlier in blood and treasure. It was more than just metal, wire, and a roaring engine. It was the right machine at the right time in the right hands. It was the sword that broke the back of the Luftwaffe and a symbol of industrial and aeronautical might that truly, undeniably, altered the fate of the Second World War.